is Shantae with Next Level Podcast, Conversations from the Other Side. Thank you guys for joining us on today. Today we are going to be talking about how to break up with unhealthy habits, and in particular, cultivating a mindset to change our lives. In that regard, I am so honored and so excited to be joined today with mental health therapist and coach. I call her a little bit of everything, Taylor Davis. Taylor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you
I know,
so
and I totally forgot to give you, your full history, but we'll get to that while we're sitting here talking. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm super happy to be here.
Super happy. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I am so excited. So let's jump right on in.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit. We're going to be talking about change and how you help your clients prepare for change, stay consistent in that change. And as we say, breaking up with unhealthy habits, unhealthy mindsets, unhealthy people, unhealthy situations. So let's start by tell us a little bit, for those who don't know, what habits are.
I would say habits are an accumulation of maybe like conscious and unconscious patterns, right? That essentially become either a routine or just the way that we live our lives, right? Kind of our lifestyle. And again, I think a lot of the focus is that it's conscious and unconscious. A lot of those habits have either been trickled down from family or culture or belief systems, or they're just simply poor choices or coping choices. And so, they can come from a variety of places.
How do you think, or what do you think is a good way to determine? Because sometimes, as you just said, a lot of our habits are things that are just normal, things that we do every single day without any conscious thought.
Right.
How do you determine? How do you, as a mental health individual, how do we help people determine what's good habits for us and what are bad habits?
Ooh.
What's your measuring stick?
I would say it's really dependent on the individual. It takes a lot of personal assessment. You've got to really take the time to look at your habits and ask yourself a series of questions, right? Is this habit serving me? Does it have a purpose? And if it does, is it a positive purpose? A lot of our habits are just, like I said, coping responses or conditioned behaviors that we haven't really been mindful about. So I think assessing yourself, being self-aware, and really looking at, am I proud of this habit? A lot of our habits, if we're proud of them and we've got a lot of self-love and acceptance in there, we're like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, But when we have habits that we aren't so proud of, we hold a lot of guilt, we hold a lot of shame, and we tend not to really discuss that. When's the last time you had a friend go, hey girl, I'm overeating, right? Like that just doesn't.
Actually, I just had one. I had a friend just
with excitement and pride.
Oh no, there was no excitement about it at all.
Right.
So you're saying the things that we do that are really not healthy habits. And when we're talking about habits, just to kind of, just clarify just a little bit more, for instance, overeating is one. And I know I had I made it a habit. I took that habit and I turned it into a lifestyle choice because I was trying to get control. All the other places in my life, I was out of control. And so the only place I could find control at that time in my life was with my food. And so I developed a very unhealthy and very bad habit of eating my emotions and eating to get control back in my life. And I would feel so guilty. I mean, literally, there were moments when I'm so ashamed of some of the stuff that I did, but it was just the desire to get that control back. And it didn't feel good, but I can think of some of the good habits some of the good things that daily practices that I've done in my life or that I do in my life that make me feel, I'm on the right road. And this gives me life.
And that's reinforcement, right? When you start to feel good about the choices you're making or the habits in your life, you're more reinforced. You're telling more people about it. You're around like-minded people who are also going to reinforce that. So I think that's another piece. Like if you're determining if a habit is good or bad for you, you really need to know what the impact is on your daily life. No one else can tell you that, right? So many people will have an opinion about how you should be living your life, but only you can do that assessment. So look for where the dissatisfaction, the self-limiting behaviors or beliefs, and really just start to kind of carve out, okay, what intentional changes can I make here?
So for people who, because naturally me and you, we have that type of brain where we'll ask ourselves so many different questions and just do a full type of assessment. But for people who don't really, who haven't had the practice or haven't been around people who do that, who take that type of self-inventory,
right?
How do do they start? How do they start taking that? How do you even take a hard look at yourself? That's a very complicated and very ugly thing to do on some days.
Well, I think, most times people don't just wake up on a Tuesday like, I'm going to change today. I think it takes something big and something bold, dramatic, sometimes traumatic for people to really want to shift something, right? Mm-hmm. Good or bad. So a lot of times, like in sessions, right, in therapy, people come in and they don't have the blueprint. They don't have that skill set of, okay, how do I look inward and really take that inventory of what do I need to change and not? So again, support systems, people who can help you take a look at those questions, right? Mm-hmm. Therapists, people that are trained and have the skill set to walk you through that. Or for me, my practical advice is whip you out a sheet of paper. Write down the behaviors you do, the thoughts you engage in, the feelings you tend to experience, your relationship patterns, you name it, you want to write it down and just start there and then write a feeling word next to it. So if your tendency or your habit is I have a habit of overthinking, write down next to it what you feel when you overthink. So I have a tendency to overthink, I feel anxious, then that leads me to need reassurance in my relationships. So then you over time, you start to connect the dots. If you don't know where to start, I would ask for help. But again, I think the awareness to know that change is necessary, it usually takes something bold and impactful. And as unfortunate as that is, it's necessary because then you have a why. Mm-hmm. Then you have some intrinsic motivation to at least help you plant the feet and get started one foot in front of the other. But, my personal opinion, especially with seeing so many people day in and day out of the therapy room, is that when people want to change, they're more afraid of the work it's going to take than actually getting started. And I believe getting started is just way more difficult because that's where you have to kind of make a conscious effort. You have to be intention and you have to give attention, right? So intention and then attention are really kind of, to me, the fundamentals.
So because, and you're right, starting change is really hard. And do you think people know and they can see, like, I'm on the precipice of change. Like, I know something needs to, and I think these may be conversations because these are change conversations. When you talk about motivational interviewing and all the different type of stuff, there are words that suggest change, like you're in that space for change. But do you think people can really see it, or is it something that you realize I was in a change space after you've gone down the journey a little bit? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Are there like actions or signposts that say, you know what, I'm in a change spot, such that people can begin to, okay, now I'm looking at what's going on in my life and it looks like I'm at that crossroad and I'm in that space of change. I didn't know what was happening. I just thought that I was just completely unhappy and I'm just looking at you and I'm tired of you. But I'm on the verge of change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think probably the answer would be different for everyone. Because our ability to kind of see our capability is different, right? And I don't know, I think for some of us, change is just an ongoing assignment. You're constantly evolving. And so there's just this ongoing shift. And sometimes that can feel more subtle than what it really is. Yeah. And so I do think there's some people who will maybe wake up and go, wow, okay, like I saw this post from a year ago and wow, right? Or maybe someone you haven't seen in a long time is like, wow, I really see this shift or this change in you. Or, so I think it can go both ways. I think sometimes other people see the shift first. But a lot of times I think we are the experts on ourselves. And I think we know when we need to make a change. And I think we know when that change is making an impact. I think on a personal note, I believe we see it first and we feel it first. But change is tricky, right? A lot of people don't want to talk about how change requires patience, right? There's no instant gratification typically in the process.
And so you don't want to stay in it because you're like, I'm being intentional about changing my eating habits, but I'm not seeing any weight loss difference. So,
or like it can be something like, maybe you've learned to maybe not talk about your pain and your feelings, right? That's a habit. That's a shift. And so when people are making that type of change, a lot of times they really don't have the reinforcement. If that's a conditioned behavior or learned behavior, they don't have any reinforcement to say, oh, okay, I see the reward in my change or in my efforts. You ever been in a relationship and you've tried X, Y, and Z differently and that person still didn't give you what you needed in return? Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes the difficulty with change is like the reward and the gratification really isn't going to look like what you thought. It's not going to feel like what you had in mind. And you have to then find some acceptance with, okay, well, I'm doing the work. The reward's going to get there, right? And that takes patience. That takes momentum. And it takes discipline. So
when you, and I like that example about being in a relationship with somebody and you start doing things, you start seeing things need to change. And I remember, I'm about to get some free counseling sessions, so bill me later. I remember when, before me and my husband separated, we were coming up on, I want to say about 12 or 13 years of marriage. And I remember at that point in time, I was beginning to look at life and I was beginning to look at us as we were getting ready to head into our 40s. And I realized that it seemed as if we had got into a stuck or a set of routines. And I wanted to be intentional about changing things and adding spice and adding new routines to our life as we were getting ready to transition into our older state, our older age range. And I remember during that time period, I was doing all sorts of stuff. I was trying to initiate a lot of change. And unfortunately, I had a whole lot of behaviors that were probably not healthy that I had been doing in the past, but I was changing myself so that would change us. And I remember getting so frustrated because I could not see, and it seemed as if he was not getting, hey, I'm working and I'm doing this for us. Why are you not giving me anything in return? But I was intentional about the preparation because I knew we were going to another stage in life and I wanted to see some change and some difference in us. You know what I'm saying? And just being intentional. And there were so many days, so many moments where I would get so frustrated and it would be hard to continue in it.
Of course. The more we love someone, the more we want to control them. Right. The more you love someone, the more you want to control them.
I wasn't trying to control
I know. And none of us really wake up like, I want to control you. But you have to just be mindful that, control is not always with malicious intent, right? Control is certainty, it's comfortability, it's security. And so when you're seeking control from your partner, you're really seeking certainty and comfortability with what you're hoping they will reciprocate.
I will agree with that.
So that key piece of, I was trying to change me so that we could in hope change us, right? Hopeful, optimistic, loving, yes, but really not realistic. And it's
how is that not realistic?
I'm gonna tell you why. Because at the end of the day, we're not responsible for other people's change. We're not responsible for other people's behaviors, their feelings, and how they respond to us. Now, yes, as his wife at the time, did you have great influence? Yeah. Could you unlearn a set of behaviors and show up differently in your marriage? Yeah, of course. But there was no guarantee, right? So then when you were met with that disappointment, that's the piece that we really aren't equipped for, right? When we're met with disappointment and lack of reciprocation. In your mind, I hit a realization, I became self-aware, then I did the work and he did not get on board with that. And that sucks, right? That's a That's a
You know
really
what? We can leave the
hard.
counseling at that.
That's a hard disappointment.
No, but that is that's really real, and that's really and truly where I was. And so I didn't have counseling at that time. I didn't have counseling, and one of the things that I lacked at that time, which I had to learn how to do, was really talk and communicate. So and I know that I'm not the only person who's hit these type of roads and this particular type of experience. And I really would like to hear the experience that you may have had. But what would you, I mean, like what you just said, I've become self-aware, and what would you say to a person who was sitting over on my side, who's probably in that same situation right now? How do they stay in, or what do they need to do? How do they, what's the game plan?
You mentioned you didn't have any counseling or support in place, right?
I did.
And that doesn't just have to be therapy. I mean, if you've got church, family, friends, or community elsewhere, that's helpful. But right. So if you are problem solving individually for a unit, right? Talk to me about how rational that sounds out loud.
Yeah, now that you say that out loud, looking back.
I'm problem solving for this unit, but I'm doing it internally and individually.
It was a good idea at the time.
With what you had and what you knew, right? So for the person in your position, I would say do better than us, right? If you have that awareness, you have the realization, I don't think there were steps that you took that weren't correct. I think that you just have to be understanding that when you go on an intentional journey of change, even if it's to shift a marriage, it doesn't guarantee that your partner is ready, willing, or capable.
True. Yeah.
And those are the harsh realities that we then have to deal with and be met with.
So I think
that becomes a conversation, not, hey, here are all the things you're doing wrong or the things that I'm doing wrong, but how willing are we both to work on X, Y, and Z? Here's my list. Here's your list. Do they look the same? When's the last time we asked each other, are you feeling satisfied? And where are you dissatisfied? These are hard, vulnerable questions that you really don't want the answer to, right? But it's required if you want honesty and transparency, because the more honest you are, the more space I would say you have to make a decision without guilt.
Yeah.
Right.
And how do you, when you begin to start changing, or you begin to start working on these habits, because all of our actions, whether we want to admit it or not, they have consequences.
Sure.
And what I know now, especially looking back, is I made decisions from hurt places. I did a lot of things that caused people pain. And when I started really taking a look at myself and begin to really work on myself, there were people that I had to let go of. There were situations that I had to address with people who didn't want to address them, and they caused a lot of they weren't happy. There were things, even in the church, there were things that I had to literally stop doing and step away from. And because I had to step away from that mindset or that environment, and all of that in order to go to the next level and the things that God was calling me to do, it created a lot of emotional guilt within me. A lot of it. And it was really, really, really hard. Again, I didn't have a counselor or anybody at this time. I was in a space because everybody in my world wanted the world to stay the same.
Of course.
And I'm in an environment where I need to change. And every person I look at is like, no, we're not changing. And I'm now looking like the bad guy. So I had nobody there to talk to. So, that is a huge difference. But it was hard processing that guilt. And I think my journey was a little bit more complicated because I did not know. I had to learn on my own how to handle that guilt, how to live with that guilt, and then release that guilt, forgive myself, and keep going. What is your advice, or what do you tell your clients how to deal with the guilt of changing? I said a whole lot just to ask that question, didn't I?
No, but you need all of that really to understand, because guilt is complex, I think guilt has a purpose in a sense. I think that It's important to stay mindful that like guilt is not a signal that you are doing the wrong thing or making the wrong decision. It's literally just an emotion, just like any other emotion. It's going to come, it's going to do its course, and it's going to go. But I think you just have to be mindful of your why. You have to kind of go back and ground yourself with your support system, right? You mentioned that when you were making changes, you had to be intentional, not just with the specific habit that you were changing, but everything around you. And that's what I preach in therapy is like people come in and they're like, I want to be able to do this specifically. And I'm like, that's beautiful, but we are going to have to shift your entire system, right?
Yeah.
And so being intentional about the people, the places, the environments that you're engaging in is and it's just the most impeccable thing that you can do to yourself when you're trying to make a change, because the mind is gravitating towards what's it's around, right? We have this ability, the brain especially is constantly scanning our environment, right? And so if you had a donut right here for me, right, at some point, here I go, because it's accessible. It's what I'm around. It's what I see.
Well,
you
don't
swap
go
that,
over there because we got
I'm not.
some donuts.
I saw it. And if you swapped it with carrots, right? Eventually, it's there. I'm a dibble. I'm a dabble, right? It might not have the same feeling, but because it's accessible and it's in my environment, that's what I'm going to gravitate to. So people really have to start looking at the underlying reasons why they've engaged in habits to begin with, and where the need and desire for change is coming from. But guilt is part of the process. I think you have to accept guilt and find support and find people that can reinforce your decisions and your changes that you're making to counteract the guilt that you're experiencing, because it has a purpose. It's reminding you of the discomfort that's going to come into play, but it's also signaling, hey, if I'm feeling guilty about the choices that I'm making because of people here, then maybe I'm no longer aligned with those people. Maybe I'm no longer aligned with this environment if I can't walk proudly there in my new exercise gear. Or I can't share with my family member I'm vegan now out of judgment, or whatever it might be. So I think you just have to be intentional. You have to set up a support system for guilt, and you have to have a plan in place to cope with it, especially if you struggle with people pleasing, anxiety, or things like that, where we're talking about the fear of like disappointing other people. And just remember, like, you are not responsible for other people's discomfort, which then makes you not responsible for comforting them in times of your change and your journey. But if the guilt is more related to yourself, then I would really explore, like, why is this feeling coming about, right? Where is it coming from? And what does it mean? Because we don't have to give a feeling meaning. Feelings are not facts. Okay.
I like that. I do. I like that. About breaking allegiance, to these habits, these emotions, these thoughts, and different things like that. How would a person go about? Because one of the things that in the midst of my journey, I did not realize was the reason why something was growing was because I was very loyal to it. The bad habits, they were growing, they were intensifying, they had more power because I pledged allegiance to this behavior. I pledged allegiance to my anger, and I sat in it, and my pain. And some of that pain was from years and years and years earlier that had never been addressed, but I was so loyal to it. And so it was able to grow, and it was able to produce all sorts of other seeds because I was loyal to the thing. And it wasn't until I took away my loyalty to that pain that it began to lose its power. So somebody who's in the middle of change, who probably doesn't even know that they're loyal to a behavior, a thought, a habit, or whatnot, what do we say? What do we do? How do we help them?
Well, you just said it, right? It takes some self-awareness. And if you aren't a very self-aware person, you've either heard that from others, promise, or you've either kind of hit that point where you don't have a lot of information about yourself. If you're that person, then you definitely need some type of life coaching, mental health, some type of mentoring of some sort to really start that journey. If you're pretty self-aware, then more than likely, like I said, we know where the change needs to evolve. But I mean, the whole point of what we're doing, right, is we're trying to break up with a habit, right? Breakups are complicated. They're messy.
Well, how do you break up?
We've got familiarity. We've got conditioned and learned connections and attachments to it.
And we got love for it. Now, let's be clear, okay?
Yeah, some of these habits feel really good.
I had to divorce chocolate back in 2020.
Yeah.
That was heartbreaking because I love chocolate. I mean, and I mourned it for a very long time.
Yeah.
I loved it. I mean, when I say I loved it, I used to sleep with it. I used to wake up. I mean, I took it everywhere with me. I loved it, but it wasn't serving me. And so it was really hard. Some of these things that we do, we hate that, we hate as the Apostle Paul said, everything when I would to go do good, the evil is present right there. And the things that I want to do, I mean, the truth is we love them. So how do you break up with something that you love?
I think that you have to ask those questions that I kind of mentioned in the beginning when you're trying to determine if the habit or the tendency is good or not, right? Is, what's the impact like? Where did I develop these feelings in this relationship, right? What do I love about it if I love the habit? How does it make me feel? How does it make those around me feel, right? So you really want to look at self, the people you love, and the world around you.
Okay.
If you can't say that relationship is influencing those three things in a positive way, doesn't mean we have to break up altogether, but it is time to assess.
Okay.
I think the time to break up with the habit takes that isn't the starting point, breaking up with the habit. You have to recognize the impact of the habit first.
Okay.
Just like in relationships, when it's time to step out of that relationship, but the willingness and the familiarity and sometimes the negative belief systems that we have just keep us planted, keep us loyal, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it takes willingness, it takes discipline. Sometimes it takes someone else being accountable with you. I think you just have to kind of grab as many coping tools as you can and decide this is the decision I'm making and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah.
How many times have we swayed in ambivalence, right? When it comes to making a decision, especially when it comes to relationships, because those things, they pull on the heartstring, right? And we make decisions based on a feeling, right? So you had to dig past a feeling, I'm more than sure, to decide, like, I'm going to do things differently, right? I'm going to walk away from chocolate or whatever it might be. And then again, we go back to it's a breakup. It's not just like black and white. It's not just, I'm going to cut you off and we're not talking and I'm blocking you, chocolate, right? It's going to be a lot more complicated for some of us, right? You were in a place where you can make a hard decision like that. A lot of people are still flooded with ambivalence and have a lot of other reasons that will, again, keep them loyal. So, I think it's just gradual, it's continuous, and you have to give yourself grace too with I
was just about to say
some things are going to take repetition and practice. Boundary setting is a whole nother, concept when you're trying to initiate change, because let's say I am really grounded in the decision that I'm making, but then because I want to hang out with you tonight, it throws off my plan, or because I want to travel with so-and-so, it throws off my plan or my decisions. So you have to eventually just anchor down and get disciplined. Change is just, it's not sexy. It's not fun. It's just work.
That it is.
Yeah.
That it is. So one final question. Once we've started this change agent, and we're going and we're in the middle of it, what are some tips to maintain that change?
Maintenance. That's my favorite part. This is where people come in and they're like, I'm good, doc. See you next time. And then here they come trickling in later, because change is, like I said, it's a continuation. It's a daily assignment. Maintenance. I would say just consistency. If you, as humans, we need rewards, we need reinforcement, we need praise. And if you are seeing those things around the changes that you've made, then give yourself some progress and keep going. A lot of times, we think about it really black and white too, right? If I don't get to this point, then my efforts really haven't mattered yet, right? So just stay consistent. Remember that the delayed gratification is really worth it. And when you do start to get off track, instead of getting really critical and just planting yourself at zero, find your support system, get back in the swing of things, and just find the reinforcement. You know, like as humans, we're never going to do something exceptionally for a very long time. That's just the honesty of how we operate. So you'd rather just have a plan in place for when things get hard, or when this change or the shift isn't feeling, as reachable sometimes. You know, like sometimes we start off with a habit and we're really motivated.
I know, girl.
The why is super right there.
It's written clear.
And over time, right, it's easy for our attention span and other things to kind of venture off, right? So it's just helpful to have that reinforcement and consistency and grace.
I like that. I do. I like that. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for all of that amazing wisdom. And we're going to come back, because what I do want to talk about next time you come is about these boundaries. Okay. Setting boundaries and maintaining those boundaries. But thank you so much for joining us. So for those of you who are in the middle of a change, you're at that crossroad in life. And we know, as we just talked about, we know how hard that may be. Today, we wanted to provide you some tips to help you start the change, maintain the consistency of that change. And as you are examining yourself and you're examining whether it's time to break up with these unhealthy habits or actions, I want you to think about, as Taylor has told us, yourself, your relationships, and the world around you. That is a way to measure that it's time to change. We want to again thank Taylor Davis for joining us today. And if you would like to connect with her, here's how you can do so. Until next time, talk to you guys later. I feel a wave coming on. They wanna know what we on. Never quit, we keep going. Keep that heat up on us, dope. I feel a wave coming on. That wasn't good. Let me do that again.
Yeah. Just say, hey,
well, you don't need the ad, right?
Just say, here's the information for Taylor.
Okay.
Feel free to contact her.
Okay.
For
no. Okay, I do it.
Just say you like to plug in with Taylor.
If you like to plug in for like mental health tips on my social media page or individual therapy.
Y'all done said too much.